and welcome to the 905er. My name is Roland Tanner.
I am Joel McLeod.
One of the reasons we began this podcast was to counter the perception of the 905 region as culturally irrelevant. We simply couldn't accept that a region of 4 million people, larger than some countries, should be routinely perceived or portrayed as being uninteresting from the perspective of art and culture. And of course, there's a huge amount of innovative and exciting work happening across our region among the different communities for anybody who cares to take a look. This week we're speaking to Burlington Artist Briar Emond about what it's like to be an artist in the 905 region, the amazing organisations and services open to the public and artists alike for people wishing to learn more or to get involved in the visual arts. And of course, it's impossible to talk about any subject these days without mentioning COVID, and Briar has some interesting, unexpected and illuminating lessons to draw from a time where we were all forced to spend a lot more time looking at our walls. Okay, well, welcome Briar Emond to the podcast. Briar's been a friend of mine for some years now, and but is also a very talented artist in the 905 region, and has quite a few experiences of being an artist in our kind of community, and also just some of the unexpected things that have happened over the last year during COVID. That even. Well, you might think that that COVID would have been very bad news for artists, but there's been some unexpected developments on that front. So, Brian, maybe you could just start off for the benefit of the listeners, just kind of giving a little bit of a background about yourself and how you. Obviously, this is an audio-only podcast, unfortunately, so people can't see the wonderful art that you actually do. But maybe you could talk a little bit about it, give people an idea of what it is, how you came to it, and things like that.
Well, I came to it very unexpectedly and rather late in life. I was finger painting with the children and realized how much fun it was to actually lay down paint on a piece of paper and create something that had never existed before, and kind of stuck with me. I started painting every day and really low expectations with just color and texture, and kind of taken that into my love of math and repetitive patterns in the universe, and tried to, find my own chords. And it's worked out really well and really surprising for me. On a personal level, it's been my go-to during this time of pandemic, but it's also had to been modified my process, because I was very used to painting alone. And then all of a sudden I had a house full of people and had to figure out how to get creative and kind of tune them out. Earphones really help. Podcasts really help. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and music really helps. So kind of creating a sound bubble for myself. And recently I've been able to get back in the groove of things, and that's been really helpful in regards to dealing with this strange time that we're in.
So,
if we could sort of try to paint a picture for listeners of what your art looks like, and obviously they could Google you, Briar Emond. Do you have it's like a website that people could go to get a
Instagram's probably the best place to find me. Yeah. I don't know how to describe my work, except I pour a lot of paint and I try and, I guess, represent nature in a unique way, and highlight the repetitive patterns of our universe kind of through the paint, and allow the paint kind of do the talking. So I find it more interesting.
I mean, it's there's a lot of sort of organic themes of like you say, nature and things like. Go and check it out, people. It's well worth it. Anyway, that's the plug, which is very heartfelt. Well, you mentioned that obviously, being with your family at home during COVID is a struggle. But have there been any plus sides to the sort of COVID experience from your perspective as an artist?
Well, it kind of made me go into, I'm sure, directions that I wouldn't have naturally gone to. So I'm quite a happy painter. I like happy things, happy colors. And this has kind of just made me think, well, what other pandemics have people gone through? How are those symbolized? And I did a whole series that was supposed to be my first solo art show at the Art Gallery of Burlington, but that was canceled. So, and it was canceled like a couple of days before it was supposed to open. And it was because of the provincial guidelines, which are totally cool. And in fact, I was almost relieved because it's hard to have your first solo art show and have nobody be able to come and see it. So it's been postponed. It's going to happen, but it's going to happen a year later than it was going to happen. And yeah, so I've explored and I've taken it from really very symbolic to very abstract, to very tight, to very loose, from kind of a fear-based thought process to a hopeful-based process. And so these two series that I've created have been the extremes of what I've kind of gone through, or what the pandemic has made me think about and explore. And it's been really good in that regard for me personally.
I'm wondering if we could maybe go back before the pandemic and just kind of give our listeners a sense of what it was like for an artist prior to the pandemic. Like, because a lot of people don't understand what it's like to be a modern day artist. We know the work, we've seen the paintings or the sculptures or whatnot, but I wanted to just kind of get a sense of how would you go about producing the piece, selling it, and getting your work out there prior to the pandemic, and then after that we'll probably revisit how you've had to adapt that to a COVID-19 centric world.
Sure. So before the pandemic, and still with the pandemic, I sell my paintings through social media, primarily through Facebook and Instagram. And I've been fortunate enough to be represented by 3 great galleries. So the Art Gallery of Burlington and 2 other galleries in the 905 area, Donna Child Art World, or Fine Art, and Savvy Art. And so all 3 ladies that run those galleries have been wonderful in representing my work. I go from personally, and as many artists as there are, that's as many processes as there are. But my personal process is basically getting kind of a kernel of an idea that excites me more intellectually than visually, and then seeing how I can represent that and how I can mutate that idea and what different variations I can produce on that idea. And just constantly checking back with myself. Does this interest me? Is this something new? I'm not really interested in painting the same painting over and over again. But I love the flow through the series and the thought process through the series. For me, it's a matter of finding a unique way of expressing something that connects us all, which is human emotion and human experiences. And I was super excited the Fibonacci sequence comes up a lot in my work because it's a really simple mathematical equation that explains a lot of how nature grows and proportions of art as well. And so I got excited about nature through math, and I was hoping that I could get people excited about art through an innate love of math that is represented in nature. And I come to that through a process of pouring paint and having naturally occurring fractals that happen when you mix different consistencies of paint come together. And that excites me. Whether it excites anybody else, I'm not sure, but I've been really fortunate to be able to get into galleries, because that doesn't happen for every artist. And not every artist wants to produce series. They're just enjoying the process of making art. And that in itself, on a personal level, is so satisfying, and just developing your skills. But I think art has more to do with what you're trying to say and how you're trying to say it than necessarily being incredibly skilled.
And now that, because now we're in COVID world, and those galleries that you would have relied on, the Burlington Art Gallery and the 2 others, are closed to the public. So that that avenue of getting your art and your passion out there into the world, that avenue is essentially closed off to you right now. And I'm wondering how has that affected you as an artist, maybe as a sense of livelihood, or just because I don't know how many artists necessarily make art just for themselves. Like, part of it is my take is it's a communicative process, right? You have a an idea that you want to express, and there's no point in expressing it if there isn't somebody to receive that expression. And go ahead. So.
For me, that is the way it is. But for a lot of people, it's just the process. It's something very soothing and satisfying about taking a blank canvas and putting something on it that had never existed, or trying to replicate it. And there's something that goes on in the brain when you're trying to do that. It hits a lot of pleasure points. But you're right. What's strange and counterintuitive to what's going on is that, from what I gather from the galleries, is that sales are up over the last year. So
Really?
More people are buying original art than ever before. And you can't see my background, but if you could, you'd see that there is original art behind me. And a lot of people are doing Zoom meetings and don't necessarily want to expose their entire bookshelf or record collection to the world. And they're realizing that whatever's behind them is as interesting as they are, if not more interesting to the people in the meeting. And realizing that it also is a really instant way of representing themselves in a visual format. And also, being stuck in your house, you realize how boring the walls can be, and how much it's surprising to me, because before I was an artist, I would not have known this, but how much it really changes your mood. Much like music, it can change the mood of an entire room, and change the atmosphere because of what you have on the walls. And I think people are coming to realize that. And so sales have been up across the board, which is really encouraging, that people are starting to get the fact that it doesn't have to be a Picasso. It can be a local artist that really, speaks to you, or gets you interested, or gets you excited about something. And that's what local artists are hoping to connect to people. Like, if you buy my art, I want you to love it. I don't want you to do it because you're trying to support me, but you are supporting me. And what's great right now is that I know the galleries are starting to open up again, not in full force, but the sales and rental portion of the galleries are open. You can go online and view anything their inventory online through their websites. I'm a member of the Burlington Fine Arts Association, which is a wonderful organization, and it's replaced all its in-person gallery or exhibits with online exhibits. To be honest with you, I think it gives you a good taste of what you're looking at, but you have to experience it in person to get the full feeling of what the artist necessarily was putting into it, and the texture of certain pieces, and the way light hits certain pieces in different rooms and atmospheres. It really can change a painting completely. So the galleries have adapted in a really wonderful way. They've made art more accessible to a lot more people. And now they're opening up again. And I just highly encourage people to take the Art Gallery of Hamilton is now open up again. And they've got free Thursdays, so you can go in at any time on Thursdays without paying anything and enjoy their incredible exhibits. And the Art Gallery of Burlington has like some avant-garde, groundbreaking exhibits that are available to us. And there's something that changes inside a person when they're actually in front of different pieces. And it's good to feel something, whether it's positive or negative. It's great that something visual like that can maybe go beyond what the artist intended through the individual viewer's filter and bring something new to the whole experience. And so galleries are facilitating that and supporting local artists in that way. And it's a really cool thing.
There's one of the things we are trying to do through starting this podcast was to kind of counter the view of the 905 region as this kind of cultural backwater outside the real city of Toronto, and we're, like I think I said on our last episode, 905er was a name we chose because it's an insult. It's what the 416ers say about us. So, these damn 905ers coming into town. And it's, but there is so much going on in our region when you start even taking a relatively superficial look. That people like you, things, a large proportion of the say the Burlington Art Gallery material is local artists, and really very good stuff, and stuff that you simply won't see anywhere else. It's not It's they do a lot of not necessarily paintings on a wall, but ceramics and things like that. And
there's 6 different guilds, I believe, at the Art Gallery of Burlington, and they provide studio space for woodworkers and ceramics and weavers and fabric artists. So it's all mediums, and it's super cool when you start investigating these, and the talent that is within these guilds are just phenomenal, and go from very young to more mature artists along the way. And it's been a great experience for me to come at it from a very new point of view, to see these communities within the artists and within the patrons that are facilitated by the galleries. And so you really need all 3 pieces in order to make this work. But I can't say it enough of how lucky I am to be in Burlington right now with the facility of the Art Gallery of Burlington and what they've done for me and my career. But the Visual Arts Mississauga is also an incredible facility that people can go to and see exhibits as well as take classes. And you don't have to be producing something to sell it. Producing something in and of itself is a really, as I said before, is a really satisfying experience. And I highly suggest people do it. And that's one of the reasons why I started pouring paint, is because I didn't need to have any skills to have fun when you're pouring paint. And so it took me to where I am, but I started at a very low bar. And I'm really glad I did.
But I think that kind of goes to like you're getting into a bit of like the nature of our modern societies, that everything has to be done with the purpose of profit. We very, very rarely do we talk about doing something for the enjoyment of, like my wife and I have had this conversation over passions that we've discovered during the pandemic. It's not art, but we've enjoyed. My wife has taken up baking. Like normally she'd be like, baking was always a chore for her, and I myself, I like to cook. I like. I'll be honest, I like to think of cooking as like the ultimate piece of art, because it's the piece of art that you can use all 5 senses on. I'm just saying.
100%. Yeah.
But I love to cook for my family. That's kind of my passion. My wife has discovered she really likes to bake. She says she finds her zen, and she finds her like when she gets stressed out over all this, she's like, I go bake. I bake, and helps me center and calm, and it's where I go. And I imagine painting is very similar to you, Briar, and possibly to some of our listeners out there. But again, it's like we don't do it for the purpose of profit. It's not a job that we're doing. It's a passion that we're doing that's used to center ourselves and to kind of find our focus. And I'm wondering, maybe you want to talk about it, but just that's kind of a theme that I've noticed over the last year during COVID-19 is that people have kind of taken the time to look a bit inward to themselves and say, what is it that matters most to me? Like, what are my passions, and not just am I defined by my job or my career? Maybe if you want to maybe touch on that in terms of more the human quality of.
Well, I've had other jobs and I've had other careers. So, out of university, I went into the bank and worked at a couple of banks for about 10 years. And then I got into film and television production because I wanted to do something that made me want to get up in the morning. And then I had babies and could not be in film and television production anymore. And honestly, art was the last thing on my mind. But what I found when I was doing it, and it doesn't matter what you're doing it, if you can find this feeling, is when I was doing it, I wasn't thinking about anything else. And in fact, the less I thought about painting as I was painting, the more fun I had. And I really did get into TED Talks and podcasts and math lectures so that I could distract the right side of my brain enough to allow the left side of my brain to take over and have fun on the canvas. And it was a really interesting development for me on how much fun it was to just watch paint move around. And it has also been really fun to develop my skills, but that's a personal exploration. The more you learn about something, the more interesting it becomes. And so in anything that you're doing, whether you're making sourdough bread or going through Julia Child's cookbook, if you're doing it with passion and interest, it's going to be interesting. And so this happened to be my thing that I could do without anybody's permission, without any, I could do it anywhere, anytime. It didn't cost me a lot. There was no capital investment, and there was really no expectation that it was going to be anything more than me mixing some colors and getting through a time with 2 toddlers in the house. And it just kind of took over, and I was more surprised. Maybe my mom was more surprised than me, but I certainly...
Mom's always the most surprised.
And she's a fashion designer, but my dad's an accountant. And we just always thought I took after the accounting side of things. And turned out both were influential. It just took a little while for me to get over myself and have fun with it. And I think that's what a lot of artists do. They just get into the idea of creating something that excites them on the canvas. And I think as soon as you start expecting your tree to look like somebody else's tree, the fun is taken away. As soon as you set expectations that singing has to sound like this, the fun is taken away. And the joy of actually doing it just for the sake of the enjoyment of the process, it's there, and you just have to take away the expectations of what you think it's going to turn out as.
And there's a very... If the closest I think I can get to it, because I'm not a very artistic person, to say the least, but it is I am a bad guitarist. I mean, I'm tolerable to myself and nobody else, but it's one of those things that the only thing you can do if you're playing a guitar or a piano or whatever is play the guitar and play the piano. You can't be thinking about anything else. So it's almost like enforced kind of meditation of a sort, kind of emptying your mind. The rest of the day has to go away, and for that time you're just purely in that space, with the sort of, with mindfulness and these kind of things. It's about, just clear everything out and be in the moment, and you kind of have to be, I guess. So does that kind of feel like what you're getting at there?
Oh, like for sure. And so when I wasn't painting for 6 months after we got shut down and locked up, it was really bad for me, because I didn't have the capacity to go and relax, and there was no forcing it, and I didn't want to force it. This was my happy thing. I didn't want it to be a chore to get back to. But in all honesty, the more I did it, the more it came back, and I figured out the space within my house and within my head to get back into it. And I've painted probably more in the last 6 months than I have in the last 2 years. And it's just because, I'm messing around and I'm not worried about who's going to see it or what kind of exhibit I'm putting together. I'm just exploring what interests me and getting a kick out of it. And anything that gives me that feeling, I'm going to do more of.
How has COVID kind of impacted your inspirational process?
Well, I wanted it to have more meaning, I guess, to have a little more gravitas underneath it. So I really used the pandemic to learn about Canadian history, and the pandemics that the Indigenous population went through when colonization hit, and tried to figure out why we didn't learn this information. I took a course at the University of Alberta, an online course, and it was very helpful in educating me on what I thought we should have all learned in school. And I would have never done that without the pandemic. I would have never had the headspace to do that, or the time, or I would have filled it up with other things. And this made my work a lot richer and my process a lot richer. I don't know if the outcome was any better, but it was certainly a great process. And then I decided to blow it up and take those symbols that I'd worked on and deconstruct them and use color and texture to represent a feeling that I was doing with symbols. And so it was fun for me to kind of take something that was really rigid, like the Hudson Bay stripes turned upside down, and blow them apart through abstract. And so when you say, what did the pandemic do? I didn't want to focus on the pandemic, but it certainly made me think more about, what makes me happy? Why am I doing things? And what am I scared of? And to try and throw fear out the window and start playing with it a bit, getting rid of my ego and just having fun like a kid. And it just made it a lot more fun. And I really love the work that it's produced from that. And so very thankful for this time with my family. Really looking forward to the time when everybody goes back to school and I've got the house to myself again. But I wouldn't trade it, because it's made me a better person, and I think a more educated person because of what I did with the time.
I'm just literally looking at your Instagram page right now, and there's such contrasts in the different types of work that you've done. I mean, and I presume these are some of your most recent ones, and that some are very, very bright with yellows and reds, and you've got some that are much darker. So it's a real and just when you described the paint pouring aspect, and I guess for people who don't know what you do, you might think of sort of Jackson Pollock or something like that, where like literally kind of flinging paint at a canvas, but it's very different from that. Your art tends to, so some of it definitely has, you create it kind of randomly, but the end result may be a picture that is recognizably a thing that, say, a leaf or a tree, or is that's fair to say? And so it's definitely not the there are abstract ones, and there are sort of ones which are less abstract. But how the creative process goes is you don't necessarily know what you're doing when you sit down to start. Is that right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no. And I try and let the paint lead the way. It's much smarter than I am. So I'm more reacting to what's happening on the canvas than plotting out the canvas in and of itself. And I created these abstract works, and they reminded me of explosions. And then I thought, is that an explosion or is that an expansion? And I don't know if you can tell that until you look back on it in history. And I thought that was really a cool metaphor for what we're all going through right now. Is we are expanding. Whether we explode or not at the end, I'm not sure, but it was an opportunity for me to explore both those ideas, that we hopefully we're exploding some of these old ideas and expanding our idea of what things could be, and taking this opportunity to rewrite that a bit.
You've done a lot of kind of, not necessarily teaching, but I was part of an event you did that where you kind of taught us to paint like you, and we all at the end of the evening went home with like a postcard that we created, and you've obviously done a lot of that. How does that help feed into your own process, or what have those experiences been like, of kind of like working with people like me who are just almost phobic of trying to be artistic?
It just reminds me of how I felt the first time I poured paint. It was like an incredible freeing experience to not have not have an idea of what the outcome was going to be, and to show people everybody's creative. We just have an idea and a box of what this creative is, and it's just fun to mess around with paint. And so it's really fun for me to take people who aren't artists or don't consider themselves artists and show them how much fun this can be. Again, with no financial output to enjoy. You don't have to have the right pencil. You don't have to. People use dirt and water. Like, you really don't need much in order to explore this way of doing things. And it takes. I love those paint nights where you go in and you try and paint somebody else's painting, be it a sunflower or whatever. That's great. That's fun. Have a glass of wine. But I'm much more interested in tapping into individuals' own creativity and showing them how much fun it is to let go of the expectations and just enjoy the process for the sake of the process.
I want to go back to something you were talking about, how this sitting down with the pandemic has allowed you to kind of look into a bit of Canada's past and do a bit of exploration there. Mostly because I've always kind of viewed artists as kind of, while we have historians capturing the events of what happened during events in our history, and they'll write, on this date at this time, such happened. So and so said this. But I've always felt that artists sometimes capture the more emotional qualities what's happening at the time, the curiosity. I'm thinking back through time. You had the Renaissance, the Da Vinci's and the Michelangelos, and it's just kind of that. Let's explore the emotional side of being human. And you had Picasso doing Guernica and the fear of that time.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you specifically, like you're painting something for this time, but I thought like we're going through it. I think I take the last year has been a very transformative year for not just Canada, but the entire world. This pandemic has shaken a lot of us, and it's been a time of fear and uncertainty, and we don't know what's going to happen on the other side. I personally think we're going through a period of change in this country and in the world, and I'm hoping we come out the better for it on the other side. But I'm wondering, maybe as an artist, and you're not just yourself, but you communicate with other artists in the community. Is there a sense of that you're taking that fear and that uncertainty and you're channeling it into your art, so that generations from now, somebody can look back at your art and maybe understand. I get what people were scared of. Then I understand I understand when I read in the textbooks that mom and dad were stuck in home making sourdough, but it was a method of channeling their fear and uncertainty. I get it, because they might see your art or somebody else's or another artist's piece and say, I see that, I see the emotions of the time.
I think there are people that do that for sure and do it really well. And I think there's also artists that want to take you away from what the sadness is going on and distract you. So here's some bright colors. You're feeling bad. Look at this. You're feeling scared. Lose yourself in this and get distracted in my brush strokes and my color and my form. And so I think there's, again, there's a lot of different types of art, but for sure there are people out there that have an incredible ability to capture a feeling or a time in one static visual. And I think the people who do it well are really geniuses, and the people who do it well consistently are amazing, and my hat's off to them.
And I guess, obviously Canada, it's difficult to have a conversation about art which doesn't bring in the group of seven at some point. But my defense for that is that because I came from abroad, I'd never heard of the group of seven when I came to Canada. And it was like a discovery of this little known group of artists that no one had ever heard of for me. But that they were painting things. And if you probably asked them, well, do you think this represents the time? They would have said, no, we're painting trees. Yeah. But in fact, it does speak exactly of that time in Canada's history and the kind of mental space that Canadians were in as a new nation, and a nation that's huge and sort of limitless in its scope in so many ways, that you almost don't know you're doing it while you're doing it, if you see what I mean, of kind of reflecting the zeitgeist or whatever.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to do some painting with Christian Norville, Christian Morisseau, Norville Morisseau's son, and in the woodland art form. It was fun to explore that his community and that form of art was another form of storytelling, and that they use colors and symbols in a way to tell their verbal stories in a visual way. And they were breaking form in regards to doing this because they weren't necessarily supposed to, and the way they isolated different shapes and so on really influenced the group of seven. That was very interesting to me, that Norville Morisseau was considered almost a founding start or a kernel of the group of seven in regards to how they developed and expanded their ideas. I don't think you can tell until, again, you're looking back on something if it has any meaning or any legs, as they say. But I try and use things that we've never had before. So I use a lot of metallic paint to create shadows and colors that change with light. So depending on whether it's the daytime or a sunny day or nighttime, it will change the picture entirely and how you actually see the picture because of the paint I'm using. Those paints were never around before. There was gold leaf and that kind of thing, which is not fun to use as far as I'm concerned. Beautiful to look at, but not fun to work with. please. Ugh. So these fluid metallic paints, we just got them and they're really cool. And so I'm exploring with the new materials that we've got that might register as, oh, that's the time those came in. But, Keith Richards said he was searching for chords that had never been played before. And that's the kind of thing I'm looking at doing myself. Like, I like to look at history and then forget about it. I don't like to look at a lot of modern day artists because I don't want to feel like I'm repeating anything that somebody else is doing. And if I've got anything to offer, it's my unique voice. And I say that not as arrogance, but, that's the only unique thing I've got. And so it's the only unique thing any artist has is their own voice. And it's influenced, obviously, by what they absorb and take in, but hopefully filtered through, without worrying about how it's going to be perceived.
You mentioned, taking in information and putting it into a medium and using different mediums and whatnot. And going back to Roland's example of the group of 7, I'm just curious, as an artist, how we live in a time when you have access to so much information, like through your phone or your computer, you can log on to social media and you can have access to movements, other artists around the world, different cultures, different foods, different types of music, all this access to really a global community. That, the group of 7 could only dream of having access to that kind of marketplace of ideas and input and technology. You have access to it right now. Like, you can, after you log off this, you could go online, search up Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and, look around the world. As a Canadian artist, how does that impact your input? And then what do you take in, and how does that influence your work today? Does it make you more appreciative of, the Canadian landscape and the Canadian society, or does it, does it make you want to input something else new into Canadiana?
Well, I guess both. I can't tell you what it's like to live anywhere else. So I take what's around me and whatever interests me, I focus on that. So if I really like decaying leaves, which it turns out I do because of the fractals that I see inside them, and I find them more interesting, I'll take a decaying leaf and make a statement in regards to beauty with it, that I find a decaying leaf that's lived an interesting life to be a lot more beautiful and long-lasting beauty than a fresh green spring leaf. And so I'll paint it until I'm bored of painting it. And so and it allows me to express a lot of different things through the landscape that I've got around me. And I don't know how other people do it, but I think a lot of people just, take what's around them and feed their narrative. And that's what I do. So, but I only let things in that interest me, and I only go down rabbit holes that interest me. I don't go down every one. And that's important, is figuring out how to filter the stimulus that can come in. And that's, I like to listen to things more than I like to look at things.
See, that's the difference between you and I would go down those rabbit holes. I would find, I'm like, oh, what's around that corner? And before you know it, I'm gone. So
Lost, yeah,
pretty much, which is a good thing for doing a podcast, because then we can just go down all the rabbit holes together, and before you know it, we have half an hour of episode.
We're never short of things to talk about. I just wanted to, maybe as a last thing, I mean, you mentioned in passing that you've done some art that uses the colors of the Hudson Bay Company as a kind of theme. So obviously a connection with history, and as again, I'm looking at some of them right now, you kind of go from something that's obviously Hudson Bay centric to that explosion of colors that happen to be. What drew you to that? And you mentioned that the kind of the pandemic side with the First Nations, and I was just thinking, well, wasn't it the case that like disease was sometimes carried by blankets, and is that the kind of Tell us a little bit more about that, rather than me trying to work out what's going on.
Well, it was interesting to me that a symbol that the Hudson Bay blanket, as an example, and I happen to love that symbol, how it meant something so different to our Indigenous community. And then I started researching the pandemic that was brought over, the smallpox that was rumored to have been brought over in these blankets, and how those 4 stripes and those 4 colors, I did turn them upside down, but I really wanted, they represented colonialism and mercantilism and disease and so many things that we don't connect as Canadian people today. We see that and we think of home, we think of Canada. And those symbols don't mean the same to everybody. And I found that really interesting that, 4 stripes could produce so many diverse feelings from very different people. And I wanted to play with that a bit and use it as a backdrop that this is our history, but we look at our history very differently depending on our point of view and where we come from. And it was interesting to me also to dance the line in regards to trademark infringement and things like that. And I've had my work used without my permission.
Right.
And so I was very sensitive to the fact that I was doing this for a reason, that it was to create a narrative and a discussion that would hopefully bloom within people, and to not take away from a corporate branding that they've worked very hard to create. And so it's not disrespect that I'm putting forth, but more a question on how these things can change the more we know about them, and how they can mean different things to different people. And something so simple could produce so much variation in emotion. And so anything that is simple and beautiful and says a lot interests me. So whether it's a mathematical equation that explains nature and how it grows, or a couple of stripes put on a page that, evoke feelings from different people, that interests me. How little you have to do to say a lot. That's a beautiful thing to me, even though I talk too much.
Not at all. No, I think that's a fantastic way actually to bring the conversation to a conclusion. And we really appreciate you joining us today and speaking about your own experience, and also the kind of representing the many things that are going on in our region I hope that we as a podcast can help sort of spread the word about that. And I suspect we'll maybe be able to have you on again in the future to talk some more about the huge talent, as you say, that exists across our region that can't be summed up under a phrase like 905.
No, and I just encourage anybody who's listening, go out and see the art in person whenever you can, as soon as you can, because it does change your attitude and hopefully give you new ideas to chew on. So thanks for having me on.
That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns, or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We'd love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.
Looking to make the most out of this life and optimize your personal wellness? Then check out the Natural Man Podcast. Join me, host Mike C., as we explore all areas of human wellness, physical, mental, and emotional. Learn strategies to optimize your own well-being and be in the driver's seat of your own health. Remember, your doctor works for you. Learn biohacks, neurohacks, ways to improve sleep, and ways to optimize your body and your mind. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, the Fountain app, and at naturalmanpodcast.com.